So I would start, first of all, I find there's a certain irony in what happens at your high school graduation when you always get that speech about you got to follow your dreams. You can accomplish anything. But yet, the whole 12 years you've been in that school, they've been teaching you the exact opposite. You can't do anything. Only the government makes possible civilized life, and only the government makes it possible for you to survive and earn a living, and only the government makes it possible for you to work in decent conditions, and only the government makes the arts possible, only the government makes the sciences possible. Government, 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 government. But hey, you can do anything you want. And so we are sort of, I don't know, propagandized into thinking that all the good things in the world come from some guy being in charge and telling everybody else what to do. That's why I think some people accepted the idea that central economic planning was a good idea. Because it seemed to them, wouldn't it be better and more efficient for there to be some guy barking out orders to everybody instead of everybody just doing whatever he wants? That sounds chaotic and disorderly. We can't have that. So, first I would tell people, there are miracles that go on every single day in this world that occur simply because individuals are acting. Like, think, for example, there was nobody in charge of the English language. So where does English come from? It comes from just spontaneous interaction of people. There is no czar or commissar or planner of the English language, and yet there it is. But you could imagine, you could just imagine people today thinking that there must have been some English language commissar who developed the language. No, what's miraculous is how much we get done with nobody in charge, with just human beings interacting with each other like with other human beings. That's it. So these miracles take place every day. And in fact, on the free market, we have what the great Frederick Bastiat called economic harmonies. That on the market, we are all acting harmoniously in cooperation and concert together. That workers and businessmen have the same interests. Not contrary interests, the same interests. The businessman wants low taxes on his business so that he can make more profits. But the worker also wants low taxes on that business because the more profits that are earned, the more the businessman can invest those profits in capital equipment. That makes the worker more physically productive. That means more goods are produced. And when more goods are produced, vis-a-vis the amount of money in the economy, that makes your money worth more. The money stays roughly the same. The goods are increased. We all become wealthier through this process. The only thing government can contribute to that healthy process is stagnation and retrogression. That's it. All they can do is tax this wonderful process by which all of us working together improve our living conditions. But what does the state create? Does it create economic harmonies? No, the state can only create conflict. It gives a special privilege to one group that harms the other groups. That encourages the other groups to lobby for their own special privileges, which in turn harm everyone else. And it encourages a kind of low-intensity civil war of all against all. There's no economic harmonies there. The free market gives you all those things. But as I just explained, it's the market that curbs those things. Imagine in the 18th century, imagine the year 1700. Why are people poor in 1700? It's because in the year 1700 it never occurred to anyone that you could abolish poverty. It was assumed that the world you're going to be born into is a filthy world of squalor. No one figured you could get away with a life better than that. It's only when you get the market economy, it's so fantastic as a wealth creator that you realize, wait a minute, people don't have to live like savages anymore. Well, the reason people are poor in 1700 is they're doing most of their work by hand. The only way you can improve things is by letting the market function, let profits be reinvested, and build that machinery so that we become more productive. Goods become more abundant and their prices come down relative to wages. That is the only way we can become better off. Absolute poverty amounted to 85% of the world population in 1820. By 1950, that was down to 50%. By the early 1980s, down to 33%. And by 2001, down to 18%. The world has never seen that amount of poverty alleviation ever. Ever. People were telling me that in Spain, it is so difficult to start a business. There is so much bureaucracy and so much red tape that only the very wealthy can afford to do it. which is why you see gigantic businesses there. You're either poor or you're super-duper rich, because only the super-duper rich can possibly navigate the regulatory thicket that the state has imposed. The state, by the way, which portrays itself as the great savior of the poor. Now, governments did try to help people. We had foreign aid programs in the 20th century. And everybody, all the experts said the foreign aid programs are indispensable to lifting these people out of poverty. What did these foreign aid programs do? They kept these people in poverty, in case after case after case. Well, it turns out that in the U.S., if we look at modern standards of what constitutes poverty, in the year 1900, poverty claimed 95% of the population. By the late 1960s, that was all the way down to 12 to 14%. The amount of anti-poverty federal initiative during that time is so negligible as not to be worth talking about. And yet, poverty fell dramatically during that time. Then the government really got involved. The late 60s is when the Great Society programs really started to get funding. Then the government got involved. Then what happened to poverty? It had been coming down like this. All right, so the other thing is, well, if we have freedom, then the environment is going to be damaged and, we're all going to die instantly. In fact, in the Soviet Union, it was a crime, it was a felony to drop a lit cigarette into the Volga River because it was a fire hazard. A river! Number one, a libertarian would, properly speaking, would think of pollution as being a form of aggression. If it is a form of trespass onto your property and does damage to your health and to your property, then it ought to be actionable. But also, property rights are what make possible the care of the environment. So there's a lot of common sense to the libertarian position. Well, wouldn't the free market, we're taught in school, if we have what you people are calling for, it sounds nice when you talk about it, but really it's going to lead to monopolies. There are some corporations that would rather see the whole world burn to the ground than have a free market. But when you actually look at it, it's true, you have some really predatory entrepreneurs who are using their political connections to get them special benefits, tariffs that protect them from competition, whatever. But when you look at people who didn't do that, you actually have people I don't see why I'm supposed to despise. Why am I supposed to despise Cornelius Vanderbilt, for example? This is a guy who, before he got into railroads later in his career, he's a guy who defied the government's steamboat monopoly in the New York area. And then, when the monopoly was overturned, he competed with existing steamboat company. This was an astonishing contribution to the world. People's standard of living rises across the board. All the government can do is take stuff from some people and give it to you. And that is, not only is that a wash, it's a dead weight loss because of the inefficiencies and everything else involved. But when we think about something like occupational licensing, the state has to license people because otherwise we'll all be taken advantage of. Well, again, not only are there private certification agencies all over the place, but also think about whenever you see some requirement that this or that occupation has to get a special government license, ask yourself this. Do the existing firms in that industry have to comply with the requirements for the license? So, for instance, sometimes they increase the number of hoops you have to jump through to get the license. But what about the arts and sciences, though? It's really nice of us to talk about freedom and we cooperate on the market, these miracles take place, but there'd be no art if it weren't for the government. Well, you know what? Actually, the fact is that when you look at the National Endowment for the Arts, what is it? I don't even remember what its budget is these days. It might be $200 million a year. However, the amount of money that is voluntarily given by people to the arts every year is in the billions of dollars. What about the sciences, though? Now, surely you people can't be such Neanderthals. Without government involvement, we'd have no science. But it turns out, again, if you look actually at history, you look at before people's fortunes were being decimated by death taxes and income taxes and all that, the private sector vastly outperformed the public sector in donations to the sciences. We're not even close. Same thing with welfare spending, by the way. It's a privilege to be involved in this movement, and I hope you'll always think of it that way. And thanks again for having me.